All righty. So if you remember, I'm sorry I couldn't be here last week, but the week before we had started examining the Gospel of John. The week before that, we had looked at the miracles in the Synoptic Gospels. So that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then started last week with the Gospel, or 2 weeks ago with the Gospel of John. And uh, pretty much in the Gospel of John, they're not so much called miracles, they're called more signs, um, mainly because John intentionally limits the amount of miracles, if you will, in his Gospel and uses them in such a way to really invite the reader to dig deep theologically. And so they're going behind going deeper than just kind of looking at you know water made being changed into wine, and kind of pointing to Jesus and asking us to look at Jesus and
Yeah.
um
So,
in a way um in which we haven't seen him before. All right, and so if we remember correctly, we have seven signs in the gospel. We looked at the very first one, which is the turning water into wine. And then we started looking at the second one. We kind of finished that, the healing of the official son. And I kind of figured instead of just kind of zipping past them, our conversation was pretty deep and rich. And I figured, okay, let's stay with this for another week. We'll finish this out and then move on um, next time. Okay. And so we looked at the wedding at Cana in Galilee. Okay. And um, kind of what things that I was asking you to remember past our conversation. Water into wine, creating. So pointing to Jesus as the creator. And if we think about the Gospel of John, how does it start? In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so, linking Jesus to the beginning of time and Jesus as the logos, the word. And when we think about word, we think about creation. Also, this idea of wine symbolizing a new covenant, especially the wine that he created was probably wasn't the second rate wine. It
Mhm.
was the really, really good stuff. Um, and then foreshadows his glory. Then our second reading was right on the heels um, of the first one is the healing of the official son. Okay, and you know we talked about faith. We talked about Jesus' reach, and we talked about his life-giving authority. All right, and so now we come to um, the third of John's healing signs, or the John signs, the healing at the pool of Bethsaida. And these lay a multitudes of those who were sick. Did we do this one?
Yes.
We
yeah.
Okay,
did.
okay, I forgot. All right, so we talked about as we started. It's like, I think I remember this. All right, Jesus restore, Lord of the Sabbath. Oh yeah, because we're talking about the idea of Sabbath. Talking
Mhm.
about the idea of Sabbath. Did you have after our conversations? Anybody have any ruminations in their head? Any any more thoughts about Sabbath? Because we spent a lot of time talking about that. No, you just
No.
let it go in one ear and out the other.
No,
Okay.
I can't remember that far back.
All right. All
Well,
right.
I
So,
remember we were saying the Sabbath, Jesus, I guess what struck me was Jesus is the Lord over the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not the Lord over Jesus.
mhm.
That was the part that kind of stuck with me.
Good, good. Yeah. Yeah. The whole idea of, we tend to want to, create and mold our lives to fit into Sabbath, rather than allowing the Sabbath to speak to us and allow the Sabbath to kind of bathe into us. All right. So we come to the next one. And it's the feeding of the 5,000. And if we kind of think about it and we think about our conversation before, the feeding of the 5,000 is a story that we see in the synoptics as well. It's found in John 6, 3-14. Then Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. And Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these for so many people?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And then Jesus took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed those who were seated, likewise also of the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, so that nothing will be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves, which were left over from those who had eaten. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." And so, these are the 3 questions that we've been kind of looking at as we've been looking at these. What did you hear in the pericope, or the scripture reading? As you think about it, okay, we know something happened physically, but what is that pointing to us theologically? And what is John saying about Jesus? So there's the thing. So as you think about the scripture here, what did you hear? What's kind of stimulated maybe some thought?
Mine is shallow compared to the depth of the reading, but the 200 denarii. You got me curious yesterday with the reading in church, and so I looked it up and found out that the 300 denarii that they were talking about selling the perfume for, that Judas was talking about the perfume, they said that 300 denarii is more than a person would make in 1 year. So with just now you said 200. Sidebar thought of mine was I was distracted by that's over 8 or 9 months worth of salary.
So it's going to take a lot of dough to feed these people.
Oh, that was an awful joke.
I'm sorry, whenever my head.
That's a lot. So what's he saying here? It's a big crowd, and it's going to take a lot of money that they probably don't have.
Theologically, that this is like what you were saying earlier about the healing of the official son, that Jesus has that life-giving authority. He's not limited by the fact that there are 5 loaves.
Okay.
Prior to this, is this the biggest crowd he has then thus far at this event? I mean, the crowds kept building and building, and this was the largest crowd?
Most of the readings that we have, it doesn't have numbers.
Doesn't really say, because
No,
I was
it can say like a large crowd or that kind of stuff. The only time we really get numbers like this is like the feeding of the 5,000, feeding of the 4,000.
I'm just questioning. I was curious, except out of compassion, but why did Jesus want to feed these people? What time of day was it? Did they really look hungry? Did they not have any provisions on them? I was just curious as to why he wanted to feed such a big crowd, other than to test the apostles, but maybe that's why.
Well, I thought that the crowd came out to hear him, and it was more like a host would feed their guests.
Mm.
What struck me was just the difference with the synoptic um, feeding of the 5,000, because in those gospels, it was the disciples that said to Jesus, the people need to eat. And they told them to send them away. But in this one, it's Jesus that's instigating it, that's initiating it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a different twist that way. Good. Anything else?
And it says that he was testing them, that because he knew what he was going to do.
When does this occur in John? Out of
In-
curiosity, because in the
In
synoptic,
chapter 6.
because some of the other ones we were talking about how he was retreating,
Yeah. Yeah.
he was trying to go to rest or mourn John the Baptist or whatever.
Yeah, this says that he went up to the mountain
Mhm.
and then he saw the people in the distance coming towards him.
So we kind of are looking at this and saying, okay, we heard, the feeding of the 5,000 in the other gospels. Okay. And this is a little bit different. So Jesus, where did he go?
On the map.
Up the mountain.
Okay. He's up on a mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. All right. So we're okay with that. Now the other thing that we kind of think about, is when we talk about mountains, is there any significance to that?
Well, closeness to God.
Yeah,
Okay. Closeness to God.
that's where Moses went.
That's where Moses went. Okay.
All the communication from God seems to come on the mountains.
So yeah, so in some ways when we're talking about, we're sitting on a mountain and we're sitting down. And so as we sit there and think about sitting down, okay, it's like, okay, well, he uses the mountain. So when we think about things, no accident. So in some ways, okay, this is where, typically we see, communication or closeness to God. Okay. And so in some ways he begins to kind of open up and kind of remind us a little bit that, okay, something significant is going to happen here. Okay. Now, what's next? What does it say next?
He sat down with the disciples.
Oh, he looks
Okay.
up.
Okay, sits down with his disciples, that kind of thing. And then what happens after that?
He looks up.
Okay. What do you mean? No, you're missing a sentence. Verse
Oh,
Now
because
four.
the Passover, the feast of the
Ah.
Jews was near.
Okay, so if you're writing, does that could you eliminate that and still have the story?
I
Yeah.
mean, you could,
Yeah,
Okay,
Well,
but it explains that all these people are going to be there
for the
anyway.
Passover. Mhm.
That
well,
explains.
therefore implies the Passover.
okay. Now the Passover feast, the feast of the Jews, was near. Okay, and so could that be a way that John is beginning to explain a large crowd?
Yeah.
It would be
Could
intended.
could be. Okay. But what else is there anything connected with the Passover here?
And they travel to get there.
Breaking the bread.
Okay, Nance, what'd you say?
I didn't say anything.
I thought you said something.
No, thanks.
Travel
Okay.
Breaking the bread.
Okay, breaking bread. Unpack that a little bit, Sue.
Well, Jesus broke the bread and passed it along to his disciples. And this is his body. Now
Okay.
he's breaking bread for all these people.
Okay, so in some ways, we John connects the breaking of bread to the last Passover meal. Now, riddle me this, Batman. Is there a Passover meal in the Gospel of John?
No.
No. No, it's in the synoptics, but it's not in John. John has this long discourse, talks about the thing, but the thing that we call communion, where Jesus kind of goes off script and says, this is my body, this is my blood. John never records any of that stuff. But in some ways, okay, we as readers, okay, we know the story of Passover as far as the, communion coming out of that. But before we even just extrapolate that part out, what happened in the Passover event?
The Old Testament one?
Yeah,
The
yeah, because
God didn't take their lives. God passed over their houses because they obeyed.
The
Now-
angel of death passed over the homes of the Jews and did not strike down their firstborn, passed over their homes.
Okay, great. But is that the only thing that's celebrated in Passover?
Well,
There's
it made
all the
Pharaoh
plagues.
let them
Yeah.
go.
What'd you say, Jeanette?
It made the Pharaoh let them go.
Okay, may Pharaoh let him go. Deb, did you say something?
Well, there are all the plagues and all of the other things that they had survived.
Okay. So think about that for a second. So, most of us were around when we were going through the Torah for more than a year. And in it, we spent some time with Moses. We spent some time with the plagues. And so what were the plagues?
With the Egyptians? Was
Yeah,
it-
the 10 plagues that
it was
plagued
locusts?
Pharaoh.
Locusts?
Okay, I bad question. I don't necessarily mean what were they like, the Nile going red, gnats and locusts and boils and all that stuff. But if we look at them collectively, collectively, what were they?
Well, each
Punishment.
one was
Okay, here.
directed at something in their country or culture that was going to be eliminated, and then it created hardship or like
Okay.
agriculture,
All right.
things they depended on until they got to the firstborn.
But
Right.
Moses was pleading with Pharaoh to let the people go, and Pharaoh said no, and so God was sending punishments sort of to Pharaoh to
Okay.
wear him down.
So
Prove that God was God.
yeah. So in some ways, as Deb and Mark said, they're punishment. Okay. So we look at those as each one was sort of a standoff to see whose God was stronger. Okay.
Greater.
And in some ways, as Jeanette said, all of these plagues were in some way directed towards the gods of Egypt, and kind of showing that Yahweh was stronger than all of their other gods. Okay. But all of those, including the death of the firstborn, were all signs of what? Decreation. Okay. Decreation. And so we have this whole thing that's happening over here. All signs of decreation or death and destruction, signs of kind of what's going on. And then we have Moses come, talks about Passover. They have Passover. The destroyer comes, destroys all the firstborn except for those of their houses are marked. But, the Passover is really not just about, being, death passing over them, but it's the initiation of Exodus. Okay. And so, when we think about Exodus, okay, and when Jews sit down to celebrate Passover, yeah, they commemorate those plagues, but they commemorate that as God's mighty hand that initiated their being free to leave Egypt, to leave bondage, and to begin the process of going into freedom and into a new land and new creation. Okay. And so that's what they're there to celebrate. Okay. And so if we think about that kind of concept in light of, what we're reading, is there a way that the two seem to be connected?
So this is symbolic of entering into a new identity, a new way with Jesus.
Okay. So we have feeding of 5,000. In that Passover event, the Exodus event, do we have anything about
Manna.
feeding?
God
Manna.
provided them with food and with manna
Okay.
along the way.
God provided them with food and manna. And how much did he give them?
How much did he give them? Did you say?
Mhm.
Just enough for the day, wasn't it? He told them not to take any more than they could use for the day.
Right, but how much did he give them? Did you get one portion, two portions? Could you go back for seconds, thirds, fifths?
Wasn't
No,
it
it
each?
rotted.
Yeah, but listen to what I'm asking you. So
He
I know
gave them
I-
enough.
he gave them enough, but what is enough?
For the day.
to meet
Their
needs
household.
at that time.
he gave them enough until they were
Full.
filled. They were full. Okay. So if you were a big person and you ate 5 plates, there were 5 plates. If you're a little person ate a half a plate, there was a half a plate. But the point of the matter is that God provided their needs and everybody was filled. Okay. Everybody was filled. All their needs were met. Okay. And everybody's needs were met. And so here we have, a very large crowd of 5,000 just men, doesn't count women and children. And, what we have is, Philip, who is feeling what? Feeling like overwhelmed here.
Mhm.
Okay. And, here's Andrew trying to solve the problem a little bit, but all he can come up with is 5 barley loaves and a couple of fishes. Okay. But it's kind of in that, God is able to provide. And so we get that idea that, in some ways, the reader is being triggered. So this is sort of, a hyperlink, back to, the story of the desert and when they were in the desert coming out of Exodus. Okay. Now, as we kind of go on here, it said, Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now, here's another thing. So it says, now there was much grass in the place. Now, if I write in a story, because I was always taught, okay, you want to include things that are relevant, but you don't want to include things that are irrelevant. So Jesus said, have the people sit down. My next logical thing would be, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. So can the story continue without now there was much grass in the place that we see in verse 10?
Well, if it's there, it must have meaning.
Okay. So, looking at this and say, okay, that seems out of place, but nothing in the gospel or nothing in scripture is out of place. So what does now there was much grass in the place add to this?
Well, I can go out on a limb and say that when a shepherd is out with the sheep is eating the grass in the field, and
Okay.
Jesus is out with his sheep, and they're in the grass.
Okay.
Making them comfortable? I don't know.
Okay. So he wanted to let them know that they could sit down and they didn't need to bring their sit-upons, that they could just sit in the grass.
They're not in a desert. They're in a lush place, kind of like flowing with milk and honey.
There we go. And so in some ways, does this kind of point to the final Exodus?
Mhm.
The land flowing with milk and honey where there's much grass. It's a lush place. What do you think?
Come on, guys. Whenever we ask a question like this, it's always the garden.
Yeah,
It's always what?
the
It's
garden.
always-
It's
The
always
garden.
the garden. That's always
It's
the
always the
answer.
garden. It's always the garden.
Well, I can't help it, but it is. I mean, think about it. If you look at if you're trying to think about Jesus, and you're trying to think about Jesus and kind of a sort of Old Testament model, what model would you use to make sense out of the mission, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus?
Going back to the garden.
Well, it'd be the Exodus. It'd be the Exodus. And with the garden, we started in the garden. Okay. We messed up. So we got into Egypt. Okay. We're leaving Egypt. We're going through the desert. The desert's only really sort of, we'll call it pruning time. But the Exodus is completed when we go into the
Promised
promised
land.
land. Okay. Now, if you tell me if I'm thinking about Jesus, when we say Jesus, okay, Jesus came to earth. Okay. He lived amongst us. Okay. He lived a life as an example. He taught people how to live, but then he was crucified on a cross, death, resurrection, all of that kind of stuff. To do what?
To bring us back to the garden.
Right. Yeah, to bring us back to the garden. Okay. And so, when that's why I think it's crucial. It's crucial. In another life, I should have been an Old Testament professor. But I think that it's crucial that, we think about the Old Testament and those kinds of things because, they were the bedrock. They're the bedrock of Jewish persons, Jewish Christians that are hearing Jesus. And when they're hearing Jesus and understanding Jesus and reading this stuff, that's where their mind goes. And so, if we're thinking about this from a deep theological perspective, okay, the inclusion of Passover, that's an important piece. The inclusion of, much grass is an important piece because they're just little teeny tiny things that are going to take the reader and kind of hyperlink them back to other places. And so, we have that idea here. Okay, we get this idea of a lush, great place, sort of garden-esque. Okay. And then it says Jesus took the loaves, giving thanks. Okay. Again, we think about Passover there. We think about, the other gospels and what we've learned about, the breaking of bread and what happens in communion. Okay. And then, we have leftovers. Okay. And how many leftovers were there?
12
Well,
baskets,
baskets.
Okay. Why 12 baskets?
12 tribes.
Tribes.
Okay. 12 tribes, 12 disciples, 12. So, when we think about that and we think about 12, okay, everyone had enough. Okay. And so it led them to exclaim, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. And when they think about when they say truly the prophet who comes into the world, what are they saying here?
The Messiah.
The Messiah. Okay.
Mm.
So as we think about John, then we think about this sign, what is John saying about Jesus here?
In the beginning was the Word.
Okay.
I mean, he's talking about him as the divine Messiah.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
But in this story,
Everybody's cats and animals want to come to Bible study and learn tonight.
Oh, look at those cats. Yeah.
One put on my lap.
mine are just
So where's the dog? I don't see the dog not in
She
your lap.
just decamped.
Okay.
Alice came home, so she took off to see Alice.
Okay, because everybody's pet wants to be a Bible study.
mine's too busy sitting in front of the fireplace. But this story here is just Jesus doesn't do any it's all about what happened with the fishes and the loaves. It's not about anything he said at this point. I mean, he never delivered any kind of a did he deliver any kind of a sermon or anything at this point with these people that was worthy of John mentioning?
You mean right here?
Yes, in this
Oh,
particular
well,
story. I
we-
mean, he does.
We don't know. All we know is what's written here.
So the most important event at this particular time was the fishes and the loaves story.
Yep, it's the feeding.
It's a feeding.
Mm-hmm. So we think about it, we get this idea of Jesus, the bread of life. Okay. And true bread of life comes from heaven, sustains us just like manna sustained in the desert. The banquet of God is going to be one of abundance. So everybody has their fill. There's not this idea of a scarcity mindset. So everybody knows that they're going to be filled. And here in this section, it's kind of alluding to what's going to happen later during Holy Week. All right. Okay. John walks on water. I mean, Jesus walks on water. John don't walk on water. So Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. Now, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea. And after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea began to be stirred up because a strong wind was blowing. Then, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near to the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." So they were willing to receive him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. All right, so another story that we hear elsewhere, right?
Mhm.
Okay, and so we know enough about the Bible that we can kind of recollect the stories in the synoptics. And so think about other walking on water stories that you had heard. How is this one the same and how is it different?
Well, the one was when he was asleep during the storm,
Okay, so we have
calm the waters.
okay, so we have the calming of the waters. Good.
He was walking for quite a while. 4 miles, I mean.
Yeah, yeah. So they're pretty far out there.
Well, they said he went up to the mountain and then suddenly he's on the water.
Uh-huh.
There's no transition.
What do you mean by transition, Mark?
Well, how does he get from the mountaintop to the water?
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And that was my question also, must have been teletransportation. So
Well, it doesn't say how it happened. I mean, it doesn't say that he walked all that way. Doesn't say that he could have been beamed up like Star Trek. Doesn't say. And Alan, you saying something?
I was saying, beam me up, Scotty.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we think about those details, it kind of pulls us away from, what John's intending to say, because those types of details are really unimportant for John.
Distractions.
Well, yeah, they're distractions from the point that he's trying to make. So, what's the point that he's trying to make?
that Jesus is divine.
Okay, so that Jesus is divine. In what ways do we see divinity here?
Nature, he's not bound by natural law.
Okay, he's not bound by natural law,
He has dominion over the sea.
has dominion over the sea.
The people who's with him and trust him and are learning from him suddenly are afraid of him,
Okay.
that they were
Why,
frightened.
why do you think they were frightened?
Because they didn't understand it.
Okay, they didn't understand it. Okay, because a lot of times it's like, okay, Jesus is walking on the shore. They weren't sure if it was Jesus or not, so they're afraid it could be a ghost, an apparition, some other god, that kind of thing. So, but I think probably best, yeah, they didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah.
Did this story happen before or after the walking on water and the storm?
Well, that might not have been in John at all.
No, but geographically, with if you're the 12 apostles and you're with him, did you already experiencing him? Did you already experience him walking on the water in the storm, or did that story come much later? Was this the first time they saw him on the water?
So it depends on where you're reading. So if we're just sticking to John, this is the only time it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not reading the Bible. I'm an apostle, and I'm
Okay.
with Jesus. Which time did I see him walk on water first?
Okay.
This time or the storm time?
Okay. So good question. And I don't know the answer to that because remember that these are compiled stories that happen not necessarily in a historic succession. Here's a good example. What happens in John chapter 2? Anybody know?
Oh, no, I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at 5. Never mind. I don't know.
In John chapter 2, Jesus goes into the temple and the story of the cleansing of the temple.
Mm.
Okay, happens in chapter 2. Where does it happen in the Synoptic Gospels?
Holy Week.
Holy Week.
Holy Week. So at the end. And so in some ways, did Jesus go to temple once, twice, 3 times, 4 times?
No idea.
Depends on what gospel you're reading. John has Jesus going to the temple multiple times. Mark has Jesus going to the temple 1 time. So the point I'm trying to make here is that, you kind of got these, I'm going to call them stories. Okay. They have all these stories. And the gospel writers aren't so concerned about getting the timeline correct. They're more concerned about, using the stories to create a message and to paint a picture of who they understand Jesus to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So to answer your question, Mark, I don't know. I've never actually ever seen somebody try to create, a timeline on where all these things happen, because quite frankly, a lot of like the middle stuff of the synoptics could have happened anytime. There's really probably no way to kind of create a linear timeline of those things. So the sea began to be stirred up because a strong wind was blowing. You're a good Jewish person.
Noah,
Okay, Noah. Okay.
and
Jonah.
and creation.
Okay. Jonah, Noah,
Creation.
creation. Okay. What do all those things sort of have in common?
Storms.
Okay, good. So what does storm represent?
God wiped everybody out.
Chaos.
Okay, who said chaos?
I did.
Great, fantastic, chaos. Okay, so when we're thinking about the creation event, what happened in the creation event?
Organization.
Organization. So we went from chaos to organization, to order. Okay. And so that's what happened in the creation event. If you look at it, and so if we look at what happened in creation, what did God do? If we kind of visually think about, what was described in creation, the first couple of days.
He made order out of nothing, out of disorder.
Okay, made order out of disorder. It's not nothing because there was something there. But so what did he do? He separated what?
The heavens and the earth.
Okay. Separated light from dark. Okay. Separated water from land.
And
Okay. And also pushed aside the winds to the side. And so when you kind of think about if you think about how an ancient Near Easterner would think about cosmology, that's the fancy word for this kind of stuff. They kind of would picture creation to be like a snow globe. Okay. And so you have this stuff in the snow globe and you have this kind of casing around it, but you still have that chaos that's out there on the outside of the snow globe. And so that chaos can enter in. So you think about the story of Noah, what would the ancients think happened, or how would they explain a flood? Okay, that they say the heavens opened up, so that top of the snow globe opened up that was holding back the waters, and the waters begin to come. And so what do we have in the story of Noah? We have decreation, except for where?
In the ark.
In the ark, the little snow globe that floats along. Okay. And so in the same way, we think about this here when we have the sea began to be stirred and strong winds, that idea of chaos, decreation, kind of encroaching upon the earth. And here, what do we have? We have Jesus that what? Comes right in the middle of it. And what does he say? Do not be afraid. Why don't be afraid? Because what happens? Everything is stilled. Everything is restored.
So I'm fascinated by verse, oh my gosh, the cat. By by verse 17. That the disciples started to cross the water without Jesus, and then immediately when they do that, the sea gets all whacked out.
Oh, okay. Another good probably thought there. So what does that mean?
That without Jesus, it's going to be chaos.
There you go. Good pickup.
I'm also focused on the last line, verse 21, where they're out in the water, they're rowing, and they see him, and when he gets in the boat, they're instantly at land now. Another teleport.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting in that but so they were willing to receive him in the boat. So what does that say?
The minute that they accepted Jesus in, everything calmed down.
Okay. But what about they were willing to receive him?
And when they received him, they were where they were needing to be.
Their openness, like
Okay.
their
Free choice.
Mhm.
Okay, yes, openness, choice, those kinds of things. So it wasn't until, Jesus didn't come into the boat until what? He was received into the boat. And so, we have this idea of, yeah, without Jesus, I love that. Without Jesus, there's chaos. And then when they received him into the boat, okay, things had settled down.
I don't know what possessed them to start to cross the sea without him. Why in the world?
Because he went
Yeah.
up on the mountain.
Yeah, but why would they do that?
Yeah, but why would they leave him?
Yeah, he's their leader. Why are they leaving?
Exactly. All of them.
Maybe there was another boat coming later.
I don't know.
It's like a ferry.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess we do that too, right? Right? Is that like a lesson for us? Like, don't do this without Jesus?
Yeah, that could preach. That could preach. All right.
Sounds
So-
like the basis of a sermon coming up.
That's what I meant.
There-
That can preach.
There you go. So Jesus' divinity, I think Debbie let off with that. In the thing, it's we didn't really so it is I. Okay, literally, I am. Where did we see I am before?
Old Testament.
Old
Bush.
Testament, the bush, the burning bush.
Mm.
Okay, it's I am in Greek, so the divinity, and they're called to trust, as we talked about. All right, so John chapter 9, 1-12. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? And Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned, nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied the clay to his eyes. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously saw him as a beggar were saying, is not this the one who used to sit and beg? Others were saying, this is he. Still others were saying, no, but he is like him. He kept saying, I'm the one. So they were saying to him, how then were your eyes opened? And Jesus answered, the man who was called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So they went away and washed. So I went away and washed, and I received sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. What do you think? What do you think?
Is this
He
a
obeyed.
type? Oh, go ahead.
He obeyed.
Okay.
And with his faith, he obeyed. I know if I put clay on one of my patient's eyes and say you're going to see better, they'd say, yeah, right. You've lost it.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a link back to Genesis again with there was darkness and then there was light?
Could be.
Adam in the dust.
So as you good, I'm glad you're thinking about that stuff. So as you are reading this piece of scripture, what really seems to be kind of out of place?
making the mud with his spittle, kind of
Oh.
like,
Okay, but that's kind of part of the story, right?
yes.
Just the part about the who sinned.
Yeah.
I
Well-
thought the part out of place was the translation of the word sent.
Okay.
I mean, what does that matter? What the name of the pool
Okay.
is?
But wasn't the culture then that if you were ill or whatever, or
Mhm.
had a deformity, their culture was, oh, they must have been bad and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's sin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, as I'm looking at this, verse number 4 and 5, really, what does it add to the story? If you took that away, would you still have a coherent story?
Well, those are
I have
Jesus's
to see
words,
where
so
the-
definitely not.
Right.
Well, no, but I mean, so we have, they're bebopping along and they see this blind man. Okay. And the disciples, they see this blind man and they have a question. And the question is, okay, so they know that he's blind. And typically, as Chris said, in their culture, if someone had an infirmity like that, it was the result of sin. Okay. So who was it that sinned? Was it him, or was he, the result of his parents' sin, whatever? And so Jesus said, it was neither one. Okay. And, then the story, would go on. Well, then, he was going to heal him. So to kind of make you understand that concept here, he spat on the ground, made clay, applied the clay, said, go wash, da, 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 da. He did that. He was made to see again. And then, he comes back and the crowd is confused. Is it really him? Is it somebody that looks like him? And, everybody's is befuddled here. And, he's saying, it's me, it's me, it's me. And they're trying to make sense of his healing. Okay. And so my point is that, we must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Okay. And so as I'm thinking about a cohesive story,
Never darkness.
yeah, well, you could take verses 4 and 5 out, and it still would be the same story, right?
Mhm.
Well, yeah, it would, but this is foretelling his death.
Okay, it's foretelling his death, but what point is being made when Jesus, so we got the famous I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am living water. I am the gate. And here's another one. I am the light of the world. And so how does, that statement, I am the light of the world, kind of connect to the story that we are hearing here?
Well, you can't work in the dark at night, and so with him being the light, he can do his thing in the evening when everybody's getting off work.
Okay.
If you're blind, you're in the dark.
Mhm.
And so when you see the light.
Okay. Or could it be said that you need light in order to see?
Yes.
Okay. Now, riddle me this, Batman. When when John started his gospel, John chapter 1, what did he say?
In the beginning
Okay, good. So in the beginning, what else did he say?
was
And
the
the light
word.
came into the world, but they
Yeah.
did not recognize it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Now, here, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And so, in this little prologue of John, what is he saying about Jesus?
Let's tip it over.
Yeah.
It's the light of the world.
Okay, so when we pronounce Jesus as light of the world, what do we mean by that?
People can see with the light. People in the darkness can't comprehend.
Okay.
They can't see. So that's why it's important to be in the light.
In him was life, and life was the light of men. Could it be that, in some ways, it's Jesus as the light of the world that helps us to truly see life as it should be?
Mm.
I mean, you think about the beginning of this conversation here. The disciples asked him what? Who sinned? And what's Jesus say? You got it all.
Nobody.
You got it all wrong. You're seeing things incorrectly. Okay. And it's only through Jesus as the light of the world that we can truly see things as they are. And it's through Jesus as the light of the world that we see what life is really like and all about. All I see is a bunch of people staring back at me.
No, I was thinking about this. Is it saying also that, let me see if I can make this connection, that if light is connected to life, that does this connect Jesus to the creator as well?
Well, it does in the prologue, sure. Yeah, because at the first five, I read you the first 5 verses of the Gospel of John, this
Mhm.
prologue. And so, yeah, and he's setting up Jesus as, okay, he's the Logos, he's the living word, and this living word's come into a place that's dark, and that he's going to shine light into that dark place and bring life. So yeah, light and life are connected, and without the true light, we really can't truly see life. All right.
There's something minor in there too, relatively minor, that kind of speaks to us,
Okay.
I think. Up until then, it's verse, I think it's 8. Up until then, nobody in the neighborhood even bothered with him. Nobody noticed him. He was a nothing.
Yes, sure.
And now all of a sudden, he's a something. He's a somebody.
Yes.
And a lot of times we do that. We just kind of, gloss over people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing at all.
And especially people that are, have a physical problem.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that goes on. They're not.
Even the neighbors didn't even recognize him. One saying, "This is him," and others were saying, "No, but he looks like him."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's like, "Here I am, guys."
Yes. Good pickup. Good pickup. All right. Well, we are out of time, and we are out of time for the Gospel of John and the miracles. You can kind of go back where. Hold on. Let me get back to here.
I had a side thought I wanted to throw out.
Okay. We got you could Raising of Lazarus. You all know about that. You can do that one on your own. Go ahead, sidebar there, Mark.
My mind wanders a lot. So I'm going back to the 12 baskets and the 12 apostles
Okay.
and the 12. In history, is the potential for us having 12 months in a year dating back to the biblical time?
No, it's Babylonians.
Okay.
It's the Babylonians.
Who knew?
They like 12 moon cycles, 360-ish days in a year, degrees in a circle.
Yeah,
12.
I'll defer to the astrophysicist in the room.
That one's my territory. I
Yeah.
can tell you all about 12s.
I mean, so in some way, and one of the things you need to think about is that, biblical numerology is a thing in the sense that, 40 days, 3 days, 7 days, those kinds of numbers are not accidents. They really are symbolically used for to make a statement like 7 is the number of perfection, completeness, so those kinds of things.
Careful, you're starting to lay the groundwork for the next Bible study.
No, no. I'm already working on the next Bible study. I already told you we're doing the intertestamental period. We're talking about Maccabees, Tobit, Bel and the Dragon, Susanna, Ben Sira, and a bunch of other stuff because I've already started working on it. All right.
So
Okie
what
doke.
are we doing next week?
Huh? Next week is hold on a minute. I kind of got where did hold on, let me I clipped out of the so next week is parables in Matthew and Mark.
Okay.
Okay, and then it'll be parables in Luke and symbolism in John. Week after that, Jesus' passion and death. And the last session is resurrection. And then we'll be done. Okay.
Right.
All right. Everybody.
Okay.